Bom, pessoal, boa tarde. Esperamos que todos estejam bem. As pessoas que estão aqui no auditório, acompanhando a atividade presencialmente, e também as pessoas que estão acompanhando a transmissão pelo canal do YouTube da Faculdade de Educação. Então, sejam todos bem-vindos, bem-vindas. A gente vai dar início a essa atividade, que faz parte do primeiro encontro acadêmico entre a Faculdade de Educação da Universidade de São Paulo e a Universidade de Hiroshima, no Japão. Então, a gente vai iniciar a sessão com a abertura oficial pela professora Carlota Boto, que é a diretora da Faculdade de Educação, e temos a presença do professor Paulo Braz, representando a Alcane, que é o diretor adjunto de Mobilidade Internacional. Assim que eles fizerem a fala, a gente vai desmontar a mesa e convidar, então, os professores Johnson Kim, da Universidade de Hiroshima, o professor Kazuhiro Kushihara, da Universidade de Hiroshima, e a professora Fabiana Jardim, da Faculdade de Educação da Universidade de São Paulo, para fazerem a exposição. E durante a atividade eu vou passar uma lista de presença para as pessoas que estão aqui fisicamente, presencialmente, assinarem. Se não fizeram a inscrição com antecedência, no final da lista tem um espaço para vocês colocarem a presença, e no decorrer da atividade, para as pessoas que estão participando online, será disponibilizado um formulário para a presença online. Tudo bem? Então, a gente vai iniciar a atividade. Vamos ajudar para eles esclarecendo só dessas informações, tá bom? Obrigado. Ok? Então, iniciando essa atividade do primeiro seminário acadêmico entre a Faculdade de Educação da Universidade de São Paulo, Brasil, e a Universidade de Hiroshima, no Japão, professora Carlota Boto, diretora da faculdade.
Boa tarde a todos e todas. Eu inicio cumprimentando a iniciativa dos professores Aguinaldo e Fabiana. Eu cumprimento o professor Paulo Alcane, que compõe a mesa aqui comigo. O Paulo da Alcane, não é? Desculpe, eu coloquei Paulo e Alcane. Professor Paulo Braz, da Alcane, que compõe a mesa aqui comigo. Cumprimento os professores Kazuhiro Kushihara e o professor Johnson Kim, agradecendo a presença. É uma honra pela Faculdade de Educação na abertura dessa atividade Peace Education in Brazil and Japan, Perspectives and Possibilities. Você quer...
So the Dean of the Faculty, Dr. Boto, she's giving the compliments and also welcoming for all the people that are attending this activity, and also giving the compliments for our visitors from Japan, Professor Dr. Kim and Dr. Kushihara, and also Dr. Jardim, and also giving the compliments for Dr. Braz from the International Office of University of São Paulo.
Essa é uma atividade organizada pelo Escritório de Relações Internacionais da Faculdade de Educação, em conjunto com a Comissão de Pesquisa. A Universidade de Hiroshima dispensa apresentações pelo caráter simbólico que tem em relação a uma cultura de paz, e estabelece programas de pesquisa e educação para a paz com foco no combate à proliferação de armas nucleares, visto que eles foram as primeiras vítimas da bomba atômica que destruiu no dia 6 de agosto de 1945, não é, a cidade que se reconstrói continuamente desde então.
So, Dr. Boto is informing about the title of this presentation, that Peace Education, Brazilian and Japanese Perspective and Possibilities, because this is an initiative of the research committee from the Faculty of Education and also the International Office from the Faculty of Education in articulated to promote the research about this issue, peace education. And also highlighted that Hiroshima University is one of the specialists around the world, well-recognized institution to talk about peace education, taking into account that Hiroshima city was the place, unfortunately, that we have the first victims after a bomb attack during the on 60 August 1945. So they have a very successful program and research, teaching and research program about peace education, especially fighting against the atomic or nuclear weapons, for example.
E, finalmente, a Faculdade de Educação desenvolve pesquisas voltadas para a questão da paz, mais diretamente ligadas ao tema dos direitos humanos. Tema esse que é trabalhado pela professora Fabiana Jardim, pelo professor Aguinaldo, pelo professor José Sérgio e inúmeros outros docentes desta casa, que certamente terão uma intersecção importante com os professores e os alunos da Universidade de Hiroshima. Então, eu agradeço muito a presença de vocês aqui e quero crer que a gente poderá estar apenas no início de uma longa parceria que certamente será importante para a nossa instituição.
So finally, Dr. Boto would like to emphasize that the issue, peace education at the Faculty of Education, teaching and research field are focused on human rights, especially in the context of Latin America and Brazilian after the dictatorships that we have here, governments that we have here. And we have some specialists like Dr. Jardim, Dr. Fonseca, that they are researching and teaching about this issue. And she was so glad about this chance to have this complementary perspective for those two institutions researching about peace education in a complementary way. And she was so glad also about the possibility to establish this cooperation and for further cooperation on research and teaching between these two institutions. Professor Paulo?
I have prepared just few words in English. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the International Office of the University of São Paulo, I would like to wish a warm welcome to Professor Kazuhiro Kazahara and Professor Johnson Kim. I've tried my best from the University of Hiroshima. I would like to also to congratulate the initiative of the Faculty of Education of the University of São Paulo to host the event Peace Education in Brazil and Japan, How to Remember Difficult Histories. The academic cooperation between University of São Paulo and the Higher Education and Research Institution from Japan mirrors the far-reaching account of diplomatic relations between this country and Brazil. University of São Paulo internationalization initiatives are designed to intensify information exchange with academic institutions worldwide, aiming to scientific advancement and promote international education of the highest quality. For the last few decades, the Brazilian higher education system has been working hard both to increase academic production and further innovation aiming to the socioeconomic advancement of our population. International partnerships and the mobility of members of the scholarly community are imperative to this process. In this regard, Japan is one of the key East Asian countries whose partnerships through its academic community is essential to the progress of the internationalization in Brazilian universities, especially University of São Paulo. Our university has expertise in all fields of science and education, and the collaboration with Japanese universities involves areas in which all partners hold the highest local, regional, and international reputation. Our offices of internationalization, both at the central level and the decentralized basis, have been acting to increase the bilateral and multilateral cooperation initiatives between the university and the counterparts in Japan. Over the last 10 years, almost 4,700 co-authored scientific publications between researchers from University of São Paulo and from all Japanese higher education and research institutions were indexed. Furthermore, over the same period, around 140 memorandums of understanding and academic agreements were signed between University of São Paulo and Japanese universities and centers of research. Among those are a series of agreements between University of São Paulo and Hiroshima University. A highly esteemed partner, those bilateral cooperation with us dates back to 2010. More recently, in 2022, a memorandum of understanding and an agreement of academic and educational exchange between the two institutions were renewed, solidifying such a mutually academic relationships focused on teaching and research. I wish a wonderful event to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. So also to give a thank you and to give good afternoon and boa tarde para todas as pessoas que estão acompanhando pela transmissão no YouTube, que podem se manifestar no chat ao vivo. So also we are giving compliments for people that are following this transmission live. You can give your comment during the chat that you open it. Agora a gente vai descompor a mesa e chamar os convidados para dar seguimento à atividade. Então, muito obrigado, professora Carlota. Muito obrigado, professor Paulo.
Obrigado.
So now we are going to invite our speaker for the round table that we are going to have about peace education, Brazilian and Japanese perspective. So we would like to invite Professora Fabiana Jardim, Dr. Jardim, to take part of this. Also to invite Dr. Kusahara and Dr. King to take a place here on this table. I guess that I can start, just switch the slides, because I guess that you're first, a gente vai iniciar a apresentação com a professora Fabiana Jardim, na sequência, a apresentação dos professores da Universidade de Hiroshima. A gente vai só trocar o slide, colocar ali em modo cheio, isso.
Eu consigo mudar daqui os slides? Não?
Eu vou até lá. Tá bom? So, briefly, Professor Dr. Jardim is an associate professor at the Faculty of Education, University of São Paulo, and visiting fellow at College of Arts, Social Science and Australian National University, CAP Sprint Scholarship. Her research focuses on the themes of Latin America, governmentality, citizenship, violence and memory, trying to theoretically account both for history and of invasion and slavery, as theoretically account both for the history of invasion and slavery as for the dictatorship and the new regimes of violence. The mark that recent history of the continent shares the leadership of the group Recent History, shares the leadership of the group of research at government, ethics, and subjectivity. Main interest of investigation, governmentalities, cultural and racial inequality, politics of memory and education. Dr. King is an associate professor at Hiroshima University, where he teaches social studies method course and runs international research project and student exchange program. He is interested in designing school-based interventions that support students to overcome the national discourse gap between countries and achieve mutual understanding. Furthermore, his research extends to educate pre-service and in-service teachers who can cross cultural and national borders with their students. Dr. Kusahara is a professor of social studies education at Hiroshima University, Japan. Most of his scholarly writing concerns the curricular instructional gatekeeping in social studies teacher and the rationale of citizenship education. He is currently writing books on the teaching territorial issues and research methodology. Dr. Kusahara has taken office as the Secretary General of the Japanese Educational Association for the Social Studies. He is also active in the social studies profession For example, he gave consult with the public schools in Hiroshima for professional development, lesson study, and acted as a member of advisory board of National Curriculum Revision in Geography. Então, só enfatizando, just to emphasize that this is an articulated initiative between the research committee from the Faculty of Education that is under the responsibility of Professor Cíntia Ribeiro, and also the international office from the School of Education that I'm the president of this committee. So we are trying to promote research in the international perspective, and we are so glad that we have this partner from Hiroshima University, Japan, discussing and dialoguing with the researchers from the Faculty of Education. Thank you once again. Thank you once again for the audience that are in person here at the auditorium, and also the audience that we can follow here on the YouTube transmission that we are just reading here, the chat. And after that, if you want to have some questions, comments, and doubts, just put on the chat. We are going to read here. Also, for the people that are here in the audience, can make questions directly for the presenters. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Agnaldo. Hello to everyone, those who are here and those who are watching us through YouTube. Before I start, I will briefly give you an audio description of myself. I am a white woman with curly short hair. I'm wearing some large square glasses, a long earring with round glass ball at the end, and I'm dressing a small polka dot shirt over a white blouse. So since I've just come back from Australia, and as we're discussing memory and education, I would also like to start with a gesture that I've learned there, by acknowledging that USP, the same way as Brazil, is indigenous land, and the Guarani, as well as the other more than 60 indigenous people that have come to inhabit São Paulo through time, are the traditional owners and custodians of these lands. And I also express my respect for their elders, past and present. For us here at FEUSP, it's an honor and a pleasure to welcome Professor Kazuhara and Professor Johnson. I take part at this activity as a sort of double agent, since I'm representing also the president of the research committee, Professor Cíntia Ribeiro, who unfortunately couldn't be here because she's in a meeting of the Council of Research, the Central Council of Research. And she's the one who organized this event together with Professor Aguinaldo. So I thank you both for doing that. It's an honor and a pleasure. And I also have the responsibility to share this roundtable about peace education in Brazil and Japan, perspectives and possibilities, with our colleagues from Hiroshima University. I'll do my best to respond to the challenge of exploring the debate about education and peace, or more specifically when we're examining Brazil's experience between education and human rights, and commenting on the possible resonance with Japan's history and the proposal of peace education. I apologize for reading, but I don't have any discipline regarding time, and I thought that if I wanted to just talk, I would never end, and then we will be here forever. So this is why. But I'm doing my best to read it very in a very light pace, so that it's also possible to understand. Because I know that when we are reading, we have like this more complex thoughts, and sometimes it makes it difficult to follow. But I'll do my best to read it very slow. So while reading and taking notes for this presentation, I struggled a bit in order to decide for a frame that would both fit into the time that we have, and that could build some bridges between the ideas of education, peace, memory in such different societies. So I decided to share some of my experiences as someone who has been teaching teachers for 13 years now, hoping that this red thread all allow me to speak from a grounded perspective. I think when we are talking about memory and violence, it's often although we have some ideas and practice that travel different spaces, it's also important to speak from a grounded place. And I'm grounded as a Brazilian person, embedded in Brazilian history and Brazilian contemporary crisis. So I'd like to start by noting that when we're discussing peace education or education and human rights in Japan and Brazil, we're talking about practice connected to specific historical events of violence and the commitment to remember them so they don't happen again. That means that we are giving centrality to the elements of transmission that constitute educational processes. It also means that we are giving continuity to a process that was initiated by the survivors and witnesses, a process of work. The work we are following them in their work of giving those events meanings connected to justice and peace through remembrance, thinking, debating, and keeping alive the unbearable questions that such events introduce into our world. It's an important task, not only because of the always present risk of forgetting, but mostly because often the very reality and meanings of these events are contested. In the case of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for example, and the bombings by the USA, they are such inconceivable events. It's worth noting that they were contemporary to the opening of the concentrations and death camps in Europe. The moment when the horror of the killing of humans in a massive scale was starting to be known. During the next years and decades, one of these events was central to the reflections on difference, human rights, memory, and trauma, while the other still struggles to be grasped as a catastrophic event or to be framed as violence and injustice. Just a brief example, yesterday, August 29, was International Day Against Nuclear Tests. I was reading a short article, and amongst the discussion on how 2023 will be the first year since Cold War, when the number of atomic weapons will increase, there it was, the idea that the bombings ended the war and therefore saved lives, reinforcing a mode of justifying these monstrous doings that complicates the acknowledgement of the lives that were lost, the after effects that kept and keep producing damage, and the undue of the disproportional attacks. By noting the different fates of those events, the genocide produced by Nazi Germany and the bombings, I do not mean to fuel the model of a competitive memory as discussed by Michael Rothberg. I just want to highlight the fact that no critic event of violence, no man-made catastrophe is already recognized as such in the moment that it happens. They need to be invested with a lot of work so they are acknowledged and can produce political, ethical, and social consequences. And this is why they matter so much to those of us who work in the field of education. I've started working on the theme of memory while teaching two disciplines here at this School of Education connected to inequalities. The two disciplines were created in the context of responding to the demands introduced by a law approved in 2003 that made it mandatory that African and African-Brazilian histories and cultures were taught in schools. For those of us, a Lei 10.639 de 2003. Later, in 2008, indigenous histories and cultures were also included. In 2014, when we were commemorating the 50 years of the coup d'etat that marks the beginning of 21 years of dictatorship in Brazil, it was also a moment of deepening the research and teaching on the theme of memory and education. Along these years, I've come across the debates on decolonizing memory studies and the idea of post-colonial witnessing, which I have found very operative to deal with the untangled events of violence and memories that are present in Brazilian history. For when we are talking about memory and the commitment to interrupt cycles of violence, we're not talking about the past, but about the present. Or as we could also say, we're talking about the presence of the past today, criticizing the fact that its pastness, to speak in terms of what Bernage has suggested, this pastness is making it difficult for us to acknowledge ongoing processes of violence. So if we say that conquest and colonization are in the past, we don't get to understand what is happening to indigenous peoples today, nor how the violence connected to land disputes echoes forms of attacking and killing from the 16th century. If we say that slavery is past since 1888, we miss how its effects are still present in the dynamics of poverty, vulnerabilities, and state violence, and how rights and symbolic structures operate to deny the possibilities of violence, the possibility of acknowledging the violence made to Black people. If we say dictatorship has ended in 1985, we miss the ways by which its apparatus and agents are present in the very center of democratic political institutions today. The tricky thing is to unveil how those pasts are at the same time ongoing and not the same, and to understand that, as Saidiya Hartman has taught us, there are things about the present that can only be addressed by repairing the past, which is a very strange idea, right? We have been, historical thinking has taught us that the past is in the past, that times moves forward and never goes back. But there has been a lot of work experimenting with the past, refusing its pastness, and addressing archives to learn not so much an alternative historic path or a forgotten truth that has stayed in the past, but to point to the violence that give archives their very form. To repair the past is, in some sense, to allow ourselves to be confronted by its horror, by the questions posed by unimaginable events that, notwithstanding, have taken place. And it also means to acknowledge that the horror that history puts behind us is taking place again now, or could take place again in the future. In times of Anthropocene, the questions that each man-made disaster has produced are at the core of our possibilities of facing the challenges posed by still another chapter of what Gunther Anders has called a naked apocalypse. After sharing with you briefly, or not so briefly, I don't know how when I started talking, but I hope it was briefly, some of the understandings in which my teaching is based, I'd like to present some principles. Thank you. Okay. No, it was just to help understanding if I started to speaking very fast, but I think it's okay. It's the first, the previous one, yeah. No. I think it's the fourth. Yeah, the fourth. Yeah. This. Thank you. So I'd like to present some principles and things that I've observed along the way. So the first one is the importance of a pedagogy of memory that is open to tensions. That is not normative in the sense of trying to inscribe the truth with capital T of the event with capital E and its meaning, but that gives space to the effect such an event still produces since it's embedded in history. This is important, especially if we are taking seriously the idea that some of the difficult memories and contested pasts are present in our lives today. It's important to say that this position has no affinity with denialism of any sorts. It's not the historical facts that are open to debate, but the sociological, ethical, and political meanings and how they demand our action today. The second point would be education as unlearning, in the sense that Ariella Azoulay has been talking about unlearning imperialism and unlearning history. To bring contested past to educational process means to address the regimes of sensibility that make it possible or impossible to acknowledge some events as violence and disasters. Very often, what we need is not only more knowledge, but learning to understand how the very ways by which we learn the world and its history are based on not taking violence made to some groups as such, and instead learning them as economic facts, as progress, as unpleasant but necessary means to produce wealth and peace. So there's a way that we learn the world that fuels the ongoing violence against some groups. An education committed to peace, justice, and to stopping the reiteration of violence cannot restfully transmit facts in the hope that history will be a good enough teacher. There is this idea when we're talking about learning from these events that history can teach us. If we don't learn from history, then we are doomed to repeat history again and again. So history is not a good teacher. It is central, it's necessary to unveil how violence and man-made disaster become possible, and most importantly, what is our part in dismantling the conditions that keep open the possibility that it will repeat itself. The third point is that unlearning means educational process that can sustain uncertainty as part of individual and social changes. We usually hope that education teaches us something, teaches us a very kind of still knowledge, and this is not the kind of knowledge that we can learn from this kind of memories and events. This point is also connected to something that Gunther Anders comments in his thesis about the atomic era inaugurated by the bombings. Just a parenthesis, I was reading this essay, his thesis, yesterday, and I was astonished by how contemporary his theses are when we are living Anthropocene. It's very amazing how he was able to see it like in 58 and then in 62. It's impressive. So, but in one of his theses, he states that this event, the bombings, have impact on the ways we think about generations. He writes, and I quote, and the quote is there, so it's easier to follow. He states, not only our horizon of space must be widened, but also that of time. Since acts committed today, test explosions, for instance, affect future generations just as perniciously as our own, the future belongs within the scope of our present. The future has already begun, since tomorrow's thunder belongs to today's lightning. The distinctions between the generations of today and of tomorrow has become meaningless. We can even speak of a league of generations to which our grandchildren belong just as automatically as we ourselves. They are our neighbors in time, which is a very beautiful idea, right? By setting fire to our house, we cannot help but make the flames leap over into the cities of the future, and the not yet built homes and the not yet born generations will fall to ashes together with our homes. Even our ancestors are full-fledged members of this league, for by dying, we could make them die too a second time, so to speak. And after the second death, everything would be as if they had never been. End of quote. If we no longer can assure how past, present, and future are connected, and if we still understand education as a process of transmission, then we need to change how we address the things that must be passed on and inherited, and maybe focus on aspects of transmission as discussed in the field of memory studies, for example. We're talking here on passing on unsettling questions that engage oneself ethically with the pain and the grief of others, for example, which includes the possibility of putting oneself in question, as it's being discussed in critical studies of whiteness, to give another example. The fourth idea or theme, it's education, memory, and attention to the ordinary sufferings. In context of inequalities and injustice, to connect education, peace, and human rights to specific events can mean a way to avoid other violence that are pervasive to everyday life and much more related to local injustice, so to speak. Yanis Roder, who is a teacher in France and also works as an educator at the Memorial of Shoah in Paris, has discussed how he has been dealing with the different responses of the students across time to the history of Holocaust, which is mandatory in France since 1989. When the students start to be the sons and daughters of migrants who came from former French colonies, the tensions also start to increase, partially because of partially because of the competitive memory model, but also because there is this idea that to remember this event would be sort of a vaccine against radical and violent ideas, ideas that the students recognize as being alive and well in French society and often directed towards them. This is not to say that we shouldn't remember some events, of course. This is not what this is about. This only means that we cannot lose sight that we remember because we are committed to a more just world and to the willing of living together in peace. The attention we give to events, to specific events, cannot be the only focus, even if, as Vina Das has stated, suffering that is assimilated within the normal and yet not fully observed in it is much more difficult to decipher. So there is this normal, the suffering that has been absorbed into everyday life, and it's much more difficult to talk about and to acknowledge. But maybe when we talk about those events, we can work in the sense of a sort of multi-directional memory, as Rothberg has proposed. And the fifth and last point is education as a mode of not surrendering to the unimaginable. Because the massive scale of destruction, damage, and killing produced by the sort of events we are dealing with often leads to the idea that they are unimaginable, unthinkable, unconceivable. We usually use those adjectives to talk about those violence. But as Georges Dilberman states, we cannot not stop in face of this unimaginable and must imagine in spite of all, because this is the only way that we have of receiving and inheriting some fragments of the event that could help us dismantle the conditions of its repetition. To refer to Anders again, the problem with the unconceivable is that although it exists as a possibility in the past or in the future, so we cannot conceive another bombing, but we know that there has been a bombing. We cannot conceive a lot of things, and they keep happening, or they could happen. So the problem with the inconceivable is that it complicates the nexus between our thinking and feelings and responsibilities. I quote him again: "The greater the possible effect of our actions, the less are we able to visualize it, to repent of it, or to feel responsible for it. The wider the gap, the weaker the brake mechanism." So it's end of quote. And I was amazed by how all the theories about drones in war also are very connected to the things that he was thinking, and it was like the 50s and the beginning of the 60s. But, well, what I've meant to share in these short notes, I'm insisting they are short because I hope they were, is something of my experience as a teacher that has been trying to work within the framework of education and human rights, especially in dealing with contested past that mark Brazilian history. I hope we can discuss it a bit further during our questions and answer sessions, and I thank you so much for listening, and thank you again for the professors of Hiroshima University for this possibility of engaging in a dialogue. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, hello, everyone. Hola. Hi, everyone. My name is Kazuhiro Kusahara, a professor of social study education in Hiroshima University. It's a great honor for us. We have a special seminar on peace education in Japan. So I'm also express our best gratitude to host this special seminar, especially to the Agnald and director and dean. So it's a great honor for us. So today, I would like to introduce the Educational Vision Research Institute initiative. So first of all, I would like to explain this center, Educational Vision Research Institute. So what is the EBRI? So I am a former director of EBRI. So it was established in 2017. So it was a attached institute of Graduate School of Humanities and Social Science in Hiroshima University. So our EBRI's mission is by EBRI for everyone, innovative educational design. So as you can imagine, the EBRI has a double meaning. The first is the name, and the other is everyone. So education is the most important thing for everyone education. So we would like to make and propose an innovative educational design for the everyone's learning. So next, please. So our vision has three dimensions. The first is promoting alternative education. The second is promoting reconstruction of education. The third is a mediate interaction of education. So we host the many international program and meeting based on these three visions. So we have host Peruste. Peruste is a peace education and lesson study for teacher educators. We have invited Dr. Agnald to Hiroshima. He has already attended this Peruste program. So he experienced many special academic program on peace education and lesson studies. So next, please. EBRI has 4 units. The first unit is a peace and citizenship education unit. So it has 4 members, Dr. Kawaguchi, Dr. Kawaguchi, and Dr. Kusahara and Dr. Johnson Kim. Today, these 2 professors came to this university. So we will now introducing our initiatives. We host some international project and meeting. This was an academic seminar on memory. We had talked about the discussion on history education and history reconciliation among Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. And we could invite the special expert on teaching difficult history, Dr. Epstein from the United States, but in online seminar. So next, please. This is our variety of activity. Not only the research, we are engaged in practice. So Dr. Kim and I have teaching at the public school on peace education. That picture is one of the scene at the junior high school in Hiroshima Prefecture. Next, please. So why does EBRI re-examine the memory in school education? This is essence of our paper. We wrote the paper on peace education in German journal. So today we would like to quoted some essence from this article. So the title was No More War, Peace Education in Japan. Anti-war sentiment has been imprinted in Japanese society since the end of the World War II. Peace education has played a crucial role in promoting anti-war sentiment in Japan. With the catchphrase, no more war, Japanese peace education has dealt with the people's grief and suffering caused by military power during World War II, featuring the memory of tragic places such as Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Okinawa. Conveying such collective memory and pledging to the denial of militarism and totalism has been a typical way to peace education in Japan. However, the educational effort teaching no more war actually has neglected the war responsibility of the nation, Japan. The collective memory, it's around the political correct memory of World War II, emphasizes victimhood, has created the image of bad states, innocent people. All the bad things were resulted from the state and the military system. So many ordinary people were innocent. That was collective memory of the World War II after the World War II in Japan. So some teachers have taught Japan's war responsibility, but they have never been part of the mainstream of the peace education in Japan. Even in the practice focusing on the war responsibility, they have another two pedagogical problems. The first problem is teachers' indoctrinations. Students couldn't deconstruct teachers' peace memory, and nor could they deconstruct their own memory of peace, which are essential to growing the active peace agent. The second problem was student closed perspective. Peace educator has advocated students to transmit the significance of the peace to the world, but has failed to making a real peacemaker who can communicate with others who have different ideas, like including the Asian country, which Japan colonized before the World War II. So Dr. Kim proposed a new idea for the peace education, creating public spaces through authentic communication between the people who has another perspective, like including the Korean, Chinese people about the peace and World War II. So, next please. Our EBRI established a new methodology for the peace education to solve some pedagogical problem. The first is redesigning the museum, rewriting textbook, and re-editing archive. Why we focusing on the museum textbook archive? Because there are a vehicle of memory. What is a vehicle of memory? It's like a book, film, museum, commemorations, and others, which represent the past and the make of its shared cultural knowledge. It's a storage of the common memory of the one community. So we would like to reconstruct these vehicle of memory by dialogue with others who have opposing narrative for retelling our collective memory and as reconstruction of vehicle of memory. So we would like to try to reconstruct our collective memory by reconstructing the museum textbook archives. So next, Dr. Kim show us some example of our trial.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Jong-sung Kim from Hiroshima University. As you can tell, I'm not Japanese. I'm Korean, but working at Hiroshima University. So let me ask you one question. So Hiroshima is the top place that many foreigners want to go in Japan because they want to go to the site that atomic bomb tragedy happened. But for most Korean, Hiroshima is the place they least want to go. Maybe you can guess the reason why. So as Dr. Kusara mentioned, the Japanese peace education is based on victimhood. So Japan was a perpetrator during World War II in Asian area. So Japan invaded Korea and also Japan and many Southeast countries. However, at the same time, Japan is the only country that attacked by atomic bomb. So Japan has both sides. They are a perpetrator, but somehow they are also a victim. But in peace education, many peace education practices, most practices emphasize victim side rather than the perpetrator side. So based on my kind of dual perspective from Korean and also working in Japan, kind of trying to keep thinking that how I can improve this peace education for the ones that not only Japanese but also Korean can accept. That is the starting point of these practices. So our every interventions is based on this model. It is called ideal mutual understanding. So when we talk about mutual understanding, maybe we can think about the one person and the other person think exactly the same thing. But is it really possible? So even though I'm doing my best to explain about the shape of sushi in my head to you, but it might be slightly different even though I'm doing my best. So this idea, continuous mutual understanding, is based on the idea that ideal level of mutual understanding is impossible. However, accepting that impossibility, we need to keep having conversation. So having conversation itself is the mutual understanding. So based on the understanding of continuous mutual understanding, the every has valued communication itself. So in the left side model, communication is just located as a tool for ideal mutual understanding, but in terms of continuous mutual understanding, communication itself becomes a goal. So that's the difference. And this kind of continuous mutual understanding is matching the recent academic concept of reconciliation, kind of understanding reconciliation as a project, kind of ongoing project. Next, please. So Dr. Kusara mentioned the three types of projects: the redesigning museum, rewriting textbook, and re-editing archives. The first project is about the redesigning museum. So this project is called the redesigning the last 10 feet of the museum. And every museum wants to deliver specific message, right? They have their own narrative, and then they want the visitors to have some specific image when they go out from the museum. So the last 10 feet is the place that museum kind of condense their messages in the very last part, right? So kind of giving students to redesign the last 10 feet of the museum. This project tried to give students the opportunity to deconstruct the museum's narrative and then reconstruct their own narrative. And then this project was happened in 2017, and then Hiroshima University and Every hosted the OECD summer project. And then there were almost 40 students from Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, and New Zealand, and then United States. And they visited the Hiroshima Peace Memorial. And then the memorial's message is no more wars. It is kind of focusing on victim sites. And as you can tell, there are, especially the United States, as the country who dropped the bomb, might have different collective memory about the Hiroshima, right? So we create some educational space that they can communicate about Hiroshima and then share their different perspective with each other. So the main question for the redesign was what are the lasting impacts of dropping nuclear weapons in Japan during World War II. So as an intervention to create a dialogue, every student learned about the related history of dropping nuclear weapons in Japan during World War II. Interestingly, some countries does not learn about Hiroshima at all, like kind of some New Zealand students like that. So based on their national narrative, how Hiroshima is remembered is also different. There was kind of interesting finding for students. And also they visited the memorial, and then they interviewed actually with the international visitors, and then how they observed, how they liked the museum. And then one student kind of strongly expressed her interview experience with one American woman, and then the woman, as according to students, the woman was very angry about the museum because they only talking about their victim side, and then they didn't talk about how they tried to invade the Pearl Harbor, and then they didn't talk about how they tried to win over the United States, and then those students did not expect that kind of strong response from the visitors, but that was kind of some, not just aha moment, it was kind of some awakening moment for her. Actually, the students who interviewed the visitor was the Japanese students. So that was, in that kind of way, we intended to create some opportunity that students encounter different narratives that they have not encountered yet. And as a result, students designed their own last 10 feet, and then they exhibited it to other students. So total 10 groups designed their own design, and then they explained why they designed in that way. And in those kind of way, we create a further discussion about how to remember Hiroshima. That was the first case. Next, please. And then we have another museum project, and then this one happened in the 2019. In the very rural area of Texas in the United States, there is a museum called National Museum of Pacific War. And they glorify their winning during the World War II in Pacific War during World War II. And then we brought Japanese Hiroshima students there. And then we had a last 10 feet project, as I explained before. And then we also had a conversation with the University of Texas students about their project. So the main question for the redesign was, what do we want to learn from the Pacific War? And they learned about both sides' history, and then they could deconstruct their unlearned. They could unlearn their learning, and then they created their own national narrative as a last 10 feet. And museum is one medium to remember difficult history, but also textbook is also very strong, powerful medium for that. Next, please. So I have conducted some rewriting textbook projects. So this one is the one happens in the 2019. It is called Better Hiroshima Textbook Project. So before explaining this project, I need to explain the background of how Korea and Japan remember the Hiroshima. Next, please. So this is the example of the Japanese history textbook, how they describe Hiroshima. So in the left side, you can see end of war, and they talk about German and Italia's surrender, and then they go back to Japan, and then they talking about how United States kind of used the bomb to for the whole Japan territory, and then they are also talk about the Okinawa place. Okinawa. So Okinawa is the only place that the United States kind of enter into the island, the real territory. The other part they just use the bomb with airplane. But Okinawa is the place that the Japanese soldiers and United States soldiers kind of fought in person. So, and they kind of talking about that. And then on the right side, they talk about the Japan surrender. And in the narrative of Japan surrender, they talk about Hiroshima briefly. However, as you can see the pictures, and Hiroshima is remembered as a kind of damaged place. And then what happened to Hiroshima as a catastrophe, as you can see. And next, please. And this is my analysis about how three countries, Japan, Korea, America, remember Hiroshima. Japan remember Hiroshima as an end of war. Because of Hiroshima, the World War II ended. And then, however, Hiroshima had a lot of damage. But interestingly, Hiroshima just came out of sudden. It is not connected to the past, what Japan did, the Japan's perpetrator side. So by using that kind of narrative structure, so they try to talk about Hiroshima as a victim, kind of distinguishing their perpetrator history. However, interestingly, Hiroshima is ongoing process in Japan. So I use the ing thing, and then the Hiroshima is a symbol of peace, symbol of revival, and symbol of abolishment of nuclear weapon. And then it is the historical event need to be succeeded to the next generation. But interestingly, in Korean textbook, Hiroshima does not exist that much. It is talked that because of Hiroshima, Korea could independent from Japan. That is the only narrative that Korean textbook has. However, the Korean history talk about a lot of what Japan did bad things in Korean Peninsula. So Japan's colonization is the main narrative part, and Hiroshima is the kind of the opportunity that Korea could bring back their sovereignty in their country. But the most interesting is American textbook. They talk about the Hiroshima from the Pearl Harbor, and then what United States did is describe that the Hiroshima got a lot of damage. They kind of described it very detailed way. However, Hiroshima is a controversial issue in the United States textbook. So there is two huge articles about Hiroshima. One side is, we needed to do that. We need to drop the bomb. The President Truman's argument is written in this side, but the other side, there's one general who were against to use the atomic bomb, and we should not use the atomic bomb. And then the activity that students are requested to do that, what do you think about their arguments? And then what is your opinion? Like that, the Hiroshima is remembered as the controversial issue in the United States. Like this, every country has different memory about Hiroshima. So utilizing this deep narrative gap, we kind of try to create some learning opportunity for students while they rewriting history textbook. Can you go back to the 2 slides more? Yeah, thank you. So in this process, South Korean pre-service social studies teachers, and then the Japan's pre-service social studies teachers are the participants, and then they encountered alternative narratives, and then critically examine their own narrative and then the other side's narrative, utilizing textbook analysis, and then they create their own version of textbook, and then they suggest each other. And then Korean side, they talk about they need to put imperialism, and they need to start from the Sino-Japanese War, Russo-Japanese War, and then they also talk about this textbook need to include the invasion of Japan's invasion to Asia, and then they also agreed to talk about the damage from atomic bomb, and also among the people who got damaged by the atomic bomb, there were Korean people. Because during that time, Korea was colonized by Japan, and then many Koreans were kind of forced to move to Japan and to work, forced laborers. And then those people who were living in Hiroshima, they also got affected by atomic bomb. And then Korean students want to remember those people in their textbook. On the other side, the Japanese side, and they try to focus on the Hiroshima itself, instead of talking about more bigger context of the Hiroshima. So they have different ideas, but they kept having a conversation. That was our next project that we conducted. So can we go to the next one? Yeah. So authentic communication is very easy idea. So it is a real communication by the agents of mutual understanding. So South Korean use Korean and Japanese use Japanese language. So they cannot communicate each other without any language help. And also it is physically they are even though it is 1 hour or 2 hour flights, but still it is kind of difficult to have a communication opportunity in person communication opportunity. So based on the authentic communication idea, we just create some communication opportunity. So with museum, with textbook as a medium. So this is a method to dialogically construct and reconstruct narrative, and then this idea is based on critical theory, critical patriotism, and dialogical constructivism, but we don't have that much time to deal with this theory thing, so I'll just skip that. But it has 3 steps. The first step is the challenging the existing cognitive framework by visualizing one's own narrative and then suggesting the possibility of new narratives. So for example, at the projects, I just asked Korean students first, and then, do you think that how Japanese students remember Hiroshima? And then they talk a lot of things. And then I showed that textbook. I translate that textbook in Korean and I showed it. Actually, this is how Japanese students learn about Hiroshima. What do you think about that? And then they want to talk a lot of things, right? Because it's totally different from what they know. So I assist that next principle is assist the students in capturing the political context surrounding the discourse of their own self and others. So let's think about why Koreans remember Hiroshima this way, and let's think about why Japan remember Hiroshima this way. So kind of exploring the context surrounding the narratives, and then I provide the opportunities to analyze and criticize the context. And lastly, I also create opportunity to provide opportunity to convey the result of the inquiry discussion of the internal group to the members of the external group. So you have a lot of things to say to Japanese students. Then let's make a better Hiroshima textbook of your version. And then they created it, and then I translated it into Japanese, and then I bring that one to Japanese classroom. And then I showed to Japanese students, and then I asked, and actually Korean students suggest this kind of textbook to you. What do you think about that? And then they also want to have a lot of things to say to Korean students, right? So in this kind of way, we create a learning opportunity and communication opportunity together. Move next, please. Next, please. Next, yeah. So like this, I brought Japanese textbook to Korea, and the Korean students create their own version of better Hiroshima textbook, and then the Japanese students also create their own version, and in this kind of way, they could communicate each other beyond the language barrier, beyond the obstacles of distance and the time differences. And next, please. And our third project is re-editing of archive. This is the parts, actually, this University of São Paulo and Hiroshima University are the members of the International Network of Educational Institutes. This is the network that the leading university of individual country only can be part of this network. That means the University of São Paulo is the best university in Brazil about education. So also Hiroshima University is also part of this one. And then Hiroshima University invited the participant from our INEI members, and then the Dr. Ario could enjoy this. Oh, he's there. Participated in Japan. Yeah. So it started before pandemic, but during pandemic we could not invite scholars outside of Japan. So we needed to move to the online setting. So this project came up during the process. So we made a video archive. So Hiroshima is a place that is a birthplace of peace education in Japan. There is a strong catchphrase in 1950s that resonated in Hiroshima area: do not send your students to the war field. Actually, they did before 1945. During World War II, teachers sent their students to the war field. And Hiroshima peace education started from the reflection of what they did. So they decided that they shall not send their students to the war field, never again. So that is matching to the anti-war sentiment peace education. So based on that tradition, there are many teachers who participated in the peace education, and then we made a video archive of how they reflect their own peace education practices. And then the Hiroshima University faculty members who knows the peace education well commented on their practices, and then we shared this video to the participant of the PLSTEP, peace education and lesson study for teacher educators participants. And like this kind of way, we create also dialogue with the PLSTEP participants, sharing individual interpretations of the meaning of the peace educators practices in their own cultural context, because after watching the Hiroshima's peace educators practices, they have their own opinion, right? So we create a symposium that they can share their own interpretations of the peace education based on their own context. So these are our example of the archive, and then they keep communicating about the peace education in this kind of way. So the EVRIS initiative can be understood as an approach to reform peace education in Japan. And Japanese peace education has two major issues, as Dr. Kusahara mentioned. The first one is the lack of students' agency in peace education in Japan. There are two mainstreams of peace education in Japan. One was anti-sentiment war focused. No more wars. That's our way to keep this world peacefully. And the second tradition was war responsibility focused. We need to apologize what we did. There was another tradition which was not that big, but still we had this kind of tradition. However, both approaches has a specific and fixed image of peace. The first one, anti-war sentiment focused, is the peace is the situation there is no war. And the second tradition, peace is the situation that Japan apologized to those countries that they invaded. So there is a specific and fixed images, and students have no agency to create their own peace. So that was the first issue. That was the main issue. So we use the authentic communication as a way to bring back students' agency in peace education. So as you can see in any museum projects, textbook projects, archive project, there is no specific answer. We just gave students the opportunity to communicate with others who have different narratives. So like this kind of way, students could deconstruct what they have learned, unlearned what they have learned, and then they create their own narrative. So Every has put in the effort to create a public sphere in which students can communicate on each other's peace images and therefore deconstruct both their own and the given images, peace images, while constructing new ones with others. And we are trying to expand our projects in the future. And then the first one is expanding authentic communication-based peace education. So we think that our so far practices is talking about war responsibility very indirectly. We didn't talk about that. We didn't ask students that Japanese and Korean students talk about that. Do you think that Japan need to apologize publicly and then need to compensate what they damaged in Korean Peninsula? We didn't ask that. We just kind of indirectly. But we need to challenge that. That's our first project. And the next one is the co-drawing on Atlas of East Asia through dialogue among students, including Russia, China, Korea, and Japan on national land and border issues. There are a lot of border issues, as you can see, with China. Japan has border issue with China, Korea, and also Russia. And then there's another project that we need to tackle. And also the third one is co-editing of peace practice of archive of peace educator or peace education through dialogue with teachers, not just between South Korea and Japan, but also with the Myanmar, Syria, Hong Kong, Palestine, Israel, Cambodia, and other countries. And the last three sentences, Dr. Kusahara, you wrote these last three sentences. I think you want to share some last comments of this presentation. You want to comment about these last three sentences, I guess.
Hopefully memory is very important. Memory open to different voice, memory in conflict and tension, and memory constantly being retold. So we want to continue this project based on these three principles. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I guess that we can start. Thank you so much for sharing this experience with us. That was really impactful. As I used this word today when I report about my experience visiting Hiroshima in front of the dome and also to taking part of this project, PELST program. And now I guess that especially for our audience that are in person and also the audience that are following in an online mode. If you have any comments, doubts, questions, se vocês tiverem pergunta, dúvida ou questões, podem fazer. Pode fazer em inglês, pode fazer em português. Se alguém falar japonês ou coreano, também pode. I'm just saying that it's open for them.
In English, if someone asks a question in Japanese,
And also Korean, yeah? Yeah, and we have some comments here on the YouTube channel. That was the first one. Let's see if I can read it because it's a small screen. It was done by Larissa Yuri. She said, perhaps here in Brazil, a way found to avoid this idea of bad state and innocent people mentioned by Professor Kusahara is calling the dictatorship a civilian military one, or corporate oligarchic, by some authors who use this terminology. And the second comment, also from Larissa Yuri, is I would like to know how long do this process of rewriting takes, and where the pre-service teachers given any previous reading, is there a follow-up to try to understand how this resonated in the practice later as teacher in the classroom. Thank you, Professor Keen and Kusahara, and also you have some knowledge for the presentation from Fabiana. It's reading in Portuguese. Obrigado, professora. Muito obrigado. So I guess that this is the first comments that we have here from the people that are following online. So for those that are online, if you still any more comment or question or doubts, you can put. And also you can listen here the people from the audience. Yes, I can try to. É melhor você vir aqui, porque senão as pessoas que estão assistindo online não vão ouvir. Se você puder falar o seu nome e de que área que você é. Curso.
Good afternoon, professors. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm from the languages course. I'm from the Japanese language, literature, and culture course. So thank you very much. I was thinking about the Hiroshima narrative here in Brazil, because even though Brazil was on the United States side in World War II, we have a very similar narrative from the Japanese perspective. I don't know if it's because there is a huge Japanese community here in Brazil. So I wanted to ask if maybe you thought about expanding this project to Brazil and the descendants, and while we learn about Hiroshima here overall, because I think we learn about it at school, we consume a lot of Japanese media, so there's this narrative here as well, so I would like to listen you talk about that. Thank you.
Mais alguma pergunta, algum comentário aqui da audiência? Então eu vou intercalando, tá? There is any more comes from online. That is Marcos Vinicius. Just say thank you for the presentations. Elizabeth Freitas, thank you very much for this insight on history and education. And Fabiano Lima did a question. Yeah, it's better to read now. Como é o dia em Nagasaki em que se faz memória do ataque atômico? Realizam atividades especiais? How is the day in Nagasaki? If they have some special activity to remember, yeah, to recover the history, if they have special activities that they do in the memory of atomic attack. And Larissa Yuri, also, I'm currently a teacher of 45 years old. The music professor talked about an indigenous people called Avacanoeiro. Tá muito pequenininho. It's really difficult. Avacanoeiro that are extinct. The students started asking about then or how and why. And Fabiano Lima again, the same that asked about Nagasaki, how was the day in Nagasaki. He's saying that the issue atomic bombing in Japan appear in the film that are in the film Oppenheimer that are exhibiting right now. Yeah, I guess that you can do some comments, because when I was reading, something is coming, so you can have a break and comment and discuss about this, and after we do a second turn. Yeah, please.
Oh, I'm not sure if there is any specific question for me, but yeah, I think someone in the online chat was commenting on how we can avoid this idea of bad state and innocent people. I think it was Larissa. And one way of doing that is calling the dictatorship a civil military, or I think that's one of the ways of doing that, or corporate oligarchic. I think this is a way that we can draw attention to the fact that it was not only the military that were producing the violence, but you have a lot of civil involvement, and you had like a support, at least in the beginning. Then I think during the years there was not that much of support, but yeah, I think, I don't know if there was another question for me, but I think oh yeah, but I think Larissa has presented a question about how to talk about how we can take into account the reference that I mentioned about Brazilian context, but also considering students' agency. Perhaps starting with the question of there is I can't read because there is like this heart inside of the what do we want to learn from them? Maybe starting with this question.
There is an emoji.
Yeah, like in the yeah, a lot of things. We don't. We're old. We don't see it, and you don't have to do like this. But okay. Yeah, but I think, of course, when I was mentioning my experience, I deal with adults that are training, that are studying to become teachers. So it's very different to tackle those questions when we are talking with adults, and then when we are talking to younger people. But I think there are different ways by which we can address this. I'm thinking we have a lot of experience, great experience with the implementation of the 10.639 law with small children, and that you can start. I think this is something she mentioned. Asking them, what do you want to learn from these people? Of course, it's a point of departure to start studying, and then eventually the fact that they were extinct will come up, and then I think I don't know, maybe when we were describing the project and all the steps and the idea of opening a space for debate, and then dealing with that comes with those collective space. I think we can think that this is also a good principle, even if we are dealing with small children, because of course, they will not have the same kind of understanding or that older children have, but they will have some image, or they will have their ideas about what's happening. And one of the things that we know because of those experiences is that they are very sensitive to the understanding and to connecting past and present, and to understanding that there is a history. Because I'm thinking specifically about how when children start learning about African nations, and then they start learning about their histories and then about their culture, and then they have a different sort of representations of that people that is not within the frame neither of black people in Americas or the idea of how Africa is usually represented in media and things like. And very quickly, these children start to understand themselves differently, connecting to this inheritance, for example. So yeah, I think this idea of betting that if you give them agency and if you allow them to elaborate their own questions towards this history, it's always a good way to start, and it's a very good principle to follow. So, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for the questions, and every question looks very interesting, and I want to talk about each question more than 2 hours, but we don't have that much time. So let's briefly talk. Let me briefly answer to those questions. So let's start from Oppenheimer. Did you see the movie? You didn't see some of you see the movie. So Oppenheimer is a person who actively involved in the developing of atomic bomb and atomic bomb projects. And then that movie is the movie that kind of describe that person's kind of inner side. Not just outside, the social cultural background of developing atomic bomb, but also his inner side as a person who developed atomic bomb and killed many people, right? Eventually, atomic bomb killed tons of people, and then he felt kind of guilty as a person. And then there are also the scenes about the Kodo area. He was recognized as a spy of Soviet Union, but that's not a part of today's symposium. But anyway, Oppenheimer does not open in Japan. Japanese people cannot see the movie. Non-movie theater does not decide to non-movie theater does not decide to have that movie in their theater. You might see why the reason, right? So it's too sensitive for many Japanese people. So Japan, and then actually that reaction is created by this narrative, victimhood side of memory of memorizing Hiroshima. Hiroshima should be the victim, but the movie does not talk about victim side, but also the perpetrator side. So kind of having that movie in the Japan is a little bit tricky. And there is also another episode connected to this movie. Do you know the movie? Did you see the movie Barbie? Barbie, right? And then the Barbie and Oppenheimer opened at the same time, and then it was a huge success in the United States. And then there is a one coined word called Barbenheimer. Barben, did you hear? Have you ever heard about that? And then Japanese people got really upset about that word. How atomic bomb can be connected with Barbie? That was kind of very, kind of commercial movie, but Oppenheimer is the core of the Japanese victimhood, how they even can combine those two words. And then that is also affected many Japanese people's reaction. So that is why the Oppenheimer does not open in Japan. And then you might sense that how Hiroshima is remembered in Japan now more based on this reaction. And let's move to Nagasaki. And Nagasaki is also the place that was attacked by atomic bomb, but does not that much talk about in outside of Japan, right? Even in Japan, Hiroshima is more talked than Nagasaki because the people died in Hiroshima is more than Nagasaki, and Hiroshima was the first one. That is the reason. But also Nagasaki also has a lot of people died there, but it is more remembered as kind of some, how can I say that? The sacrifice of individual. But Hiroshima is more like sacrifice as a nation. So politicians go to Hiroshima a lot, but does not go to Nagasaki that much. So Hiroshima is a symbol of the victim of atomic bomb, more than Nagasaki. So everything is about the representation, how the people in nowadays people remember those difficult histories. And Hiroshima was selected as a symbol of the damage of nuclear weapon, so it is remembered as a national way. But Nagasaki in a more kind of individual way, community way. And also Nagasaki is a place that the Catholic is strong in Japan, and then the Catholic commemoration also combined with the Nagasaki tradition. So it has a little bit different way to commemorate the tragic memory. So that's the thing I can say. That if you want to add a little bit more, please feel free for you to do that. About Nagasaki?
Yeah. So it's my experience. So I taught at the textbook project. I asked to the student, so do you want to describe the Nagasaki or Hiroshima, or Nagasaki and Hiroshima? So most of the students answered to me, just only Hiroshima. Hiroshima is most important places to describe our memory in the textbook. So I don't think the reason why so students stress the importance of the Hiroshima, but it's a symbolic evidence of the common understanding about the World War II and the atomic bomb. Hiroshima is the most symbolic places for the Japanese ordinary people. So I think the textbook or another cultural history make such an understanding of a memory for the Japanese ordinary people and students. Nagasaki is, but I was born in Kyushu Island. Kyushu Island, Nagasaki located in Kyushu Island. So in my memory, Kagoshima student has I was very big influence from the Nagasaki, because Nagasaki is a more close understanding memory for us. So the religion is one of the aspect, but another aspect is geographic distance is more have an influence to the people. So, but Nagasaki has just only big influence to the Kyushu Island people, but most of the ordinary people have a big influences from the Hiroshima evidence. Thank you.
So now you can see that even in Japan, there is a competition about memory, right? The Nagasaki memory, Hiroshima memory. And from outsider perspective, Japan seems like have one narrative. But even in Japan, there are the narrative competition, like kind of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And about the question about the rewriting textbook projects, that project took 3 months. And then the students read about how textbook is understood as a representative of collective memory, and those kind of basic literature that they went through. And they just started to work as a teacher, so we couldn't follow up the how they utilized those kind of experience as a teacher. But I think that suggestion was really good idea. We need to capture how those kind of experience influence to them as a teacher. That is really important message, I think. And also the question about the communication between Japan and Brazil people about Hiroshima. I think that, how can I say that? When we select the topic of communication, we need to be careful about we need to select the one that we have the narrative differences, the narrative gap. But if actually, I'm not familiar how the Brazilian people understand Hiroshima. Well, that's why I cannot say that, oh, we should talk Hiroshima in this kind of way. But instead of that, I will say that maybe we need to select some specific topic that both sides are interested in, and then there is a narrative gap. Like, kind of, for example, Japanese immigration in Brazil. And then those people who moved to Brazil 1920s, right? Am I right? 1920s, 1930s, before the World War II. Those people are recognized as the betrayer of Japan at the time. But here, those people are remembered in a very different way, right? There are kind of, I'm not sure, but I heard that they are remembered as good people. They brought different culture and they work hard and they are very polite. But this is also stereotype anyway. But they are kind of remembered as good people. But in Japan, they are remembered in a little bit different way. So like that kind of thing, kind of the topic they are interested in, but remember the different way might be a good topic. That's I would suggest. Yeah. Did I answer every question?
I think so.
Okay.
I would like just to introduce Professor Cynthia Ribeiro. She is the president of a research committee from the faculty, one of the committee responsible for this activity. So she was in a meeting, then now, thank you so much for providing this. Any other comments, please?
No, I was just remembering because, of course, here, because after Brazil has decided for one of the sides of the alliance, then you had like some sort of persecution towards Japanese, Germany communities. And my husband is from Japanese descent, and my mother-in-law, she used to tell us that she was called in the streets Quinta Coluna. There was this kind of persecution against them. And at some point, it's not like USA that you had like concentration camps, but you also have like this. In Santos, at least, there is one known event that they were taken away from their houses and they were put somewhere else. They lost everything, and it's not a history that's being told. Only recently, I think there is this documentary about it, and there is this hypothesis that because most of the people on the community were from Okinawa, there was not the same impact on the community, so that people, other Japanese people, could like fight against this kind of violence. So you have like the relations from there in Japan that come here, and they also have an impact on how you can fight persecution. But it was a very complicated moment because Brazilian people, Japanese people or Japanese descent, Japanese people with Japanese ascendance, they didn't believe that the war was ended. So there was a lot of violence as well. So you have a lot of. I think if we start asking people and asking them for their testimony about this. This moment, we will listen to very interesting things, and I think it resonates a bit about, this is a theme of interest for me, I'm thinking about the works of people like Clara Hahn and in the United States, this idea that you have a history or a memory of the event, but you also have like a register of the event that is descends to everyday life and is inscribed in in the family relations. So I think this could be a very interesting way also to address these memories and to compare like these different sides, what people that stayed there remember and what people that came here remember. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, this conversation was very interesting for me because the teaching difficult histories is related to hear unheard voices. So like this, the Japanese immigrants went through very difficult time during World War II because Brazil was the United States side, and then the Japanese people, even though they have lived here for 20 more years, and then even though they were born in Brazil, they are recognized as the enemy. And then like in the United States, there's internment camp. Because of they are Japanese descendants, they are kind of deprived of their wealth, house, everything. But here, a little bit different story, but similar story, right? So kind of, if we listen to this kind of story, we feel the necessity that we need to talk. Even in Brazil, the Japan's role during World War II, and then how Brazilian society reacted to those people who came from Japan and their descendants. That is also that can be the topic for this kind of communication. So basically, kind of hear unheard voices is the basic issue that I would say, that basic principle about this kind of communication.
And if I'm not wrong, I guess that people could access the Every website where they can get more information about the PELSTI program, Peace Education and Lesson Study for teacher educators. And if everything goes well, I guess that in November we can continue with some activities because maybe in November they will be back here. They will come to visit us to talk also about the lesson study that is educational approach from Japan that Japan have been done for more than 1 century, and how it's possible to connect it with other issues and different subjects. So if you are interested, you can join this website and get more information about the project and everything, And also, if it goes well, you have this kind of agreement, you can enjoy to have a kind of international mobility, to stay there, to take part in the projects and everything, So I'm just checking here on the chat. There is just compliments and saying thank you for the discussion and for the dialogue that was established. And if you don't have any other question here or the audience, we can conclude today. And just to remind that for tomorrow morning that we are going to have the workshop, the meeting point is in front of the block A, na frente do bloco A, no guichê ali de informação, às 9 horas, because we don't know about the traffic, to go to a memorial of resistance here in São Paulo. The activity starts there, and we can conclude and finish here in the auditorium. But tomorrow morning, it's just to remember, please.
So thank you very much for your participation today. And then if you have any chance to visit Japan, and if you want to know about Hiroshima more, the Professor Ario knows our email address. And then please feel free to contact us. And then we will happy to help you to connect with the people in Hiroshima and then the memorial museum people. Thank you very much.
Então, muito obrigado pela participação das pessoas que estiveram aqui presentes no auditório, também das pessoas que acompanharam a transmissão online. Lembrando, quem estava aqui já assinou a lista de frequência, quem estava online, não esquecer de assinar a lista de frequência, para que possa receber o certificado. If I'm not wrong, arigatou gozaimasu. Welcome.
Obrigado. We need to talk about our collaboration. a lot of things that we can talk about. Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this whole opportunity. Thank you. Obrigado.
Great
Obrigado.
presentation.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Great